Hi, my name is Alicia Lerma, and this is my week 2 journal reflection. Phonology is my definition of phonology is learning the sound patterns and their meanings within one language or between multiple languages. So phonology is kind of the branch to phonetics and phonemes. And you can see in this visual, it's just kind of like the overlying branch of the linguistics. And this is for both English language and other languages as well. Morphology is the learning of the words and their parts. So an example might be a prefix, a suffix, or a base word. And then I found this example, and it kind of breaks down the morphology word into base, connected vowel, base, suffix, and it just kind of shows the way that we learn words based on smaller parts, and how it can be broken down. Syntax can be defined as a structure that's used for sentences and then the rules that it follows when you're creating a sentence. An example of this would be Julian hit the ball as opposed to hit the ball Julian. They're using it's the exact same sentence, but the syntax changes in the way that the sentence is structured, which creates a different meaning of that same sentence. Another example, just showing the structure, is this image that says the dog will run in that field, and it just shows you which parts are what, and just really gives you like a visual on the structure that sentence is made with. Semantics is the way that we study the meaning of a word, or the meaning of a phrase or a sentence. So the meaning of destination and last stop, they both technically mean the same thing, but they're used differently. Destination would be like, I am going to my destination, or I am going to my last stop. They mean the same thing, but they're used differently. So there's a image here. It says Sherlock saw the man using binoculars. Sherlock saw the man using binoculars. And so that's the exact same sentence, but it can be interpreted different ways. The way you interpret it would be kind of the way you individually see the sentence. And so there's a visual that kind of demonstrates the way it can mean the same, but be interpreted differently. Pragmatics is the learning of how words are used in order to make practical sense. So pragmatics is like the overarching, it's the head of all the overarching things of syntax, semantics, morphology, phonology, phonetics. It's kind of like that overarching word, and it's the meaning of how words are used in order to make practical sense. And so my example is, will you crack the open door? I'm getting hot. But practically, crack means to break. And so you would have to know the meaning of the word, and then also be able to practically make it make sense and how you're using it. So the sentence is not asking for you to break the door, but practically, to make practical sense, it's asking you to open the door slightly. And so that can be challenging for English language learners just because it requires a lot of knowing of the unknown. They would have to understand what would make practical sense, and in other languages, word order is different, and so what makes practical sense to us does not make practical sense in another language. I personally think that the most challenging for ELLs is syntax. This is because it has multiple patterns that it follows, and those patterns are not always the same in every sentence. It has multiple meanings for the same sentence based on the pattern that the words follow, which can be confusing for them to understand just because it can be very broad. There can be multiple meanings. It can be confusing when you're trying to tell a student that this is the meaning, but it also has another meaning. It's just like when you're teaching sounds to a student, you're like, it can be spelled this way, but it can also be spelled this way, and this way. And that's confusing even for people who are not English language learners. So being an English language learner and new to the language and the rules that it follows, it can be difficult to understand the syntax of something. And it's also not specifically taught in schools, unlike the other language structure components, like pragmatics and phonology and morphology. Those are all more specifically taught in a school, and syntax is something that is acquired through learning the language, using the language, knowing the language. But typically it can follow a basic structure, which would be a subject, verb, and direct object. However, like I said before, it follows multiple patterns and multiple meanings for the same sentence, so this can be really challenging for them as it's not direct and easy to understand. So I created a classroom activity based on syntax. This would be for a 3rd grade classroom. The learning objective would be, I can determine the meaning of a word by using context clues to complete a sentence. And this is based on the standard Evaluate syntax and semantic context clues used to help determine meaning and resolve language ambiguities, which is standard 4. So students would start with a warm-up where the teacher draws different common images or pastes different common images and words on the boards in no specific order. The students would then be asked to complete the warm-up by using the images and the words that they saw to create a sentence, and then students would share aloud their sentence. This allows the teacher to kind of walk around and get a general idea of how students are doing in learning the language, where they're at, and see if they have developed or acquired that skill of being able to place a sentence in the correct syntax on their own. So once some students share their sentence, the teacher would ask the students, are the sentences the same? And what do you notice is different? We're anticipating that the students would create different sentences using the syntax that would make sense. However, if the sentence didn't make sense, it would be a good opportunity for the teacher to use that sentence in order to go into the intro, which would be the teacher explaining that today they're going to be learning about syntax. The students would repeat the word after her, syntax, and then students would echo read the objective. The teacher would then show an intro video about sentence syntax, which is the link that is attached here. And it's just a very brief video by Khan Academy that breaks down sentence syntax. It uses some examples. There's a person playing a student. The teacher pauses and asks the students questions. And then they would complete an I do, we do, you do. The teacher will demonstrate a practice problem on the board. So there would ideally be a slideshow or a flashcard set of sentences that are in the correct syntax and are not in the correct syntax. And so the teacher would demonstrate on one practice problem for the students, determining if the syntax is correct. The teacher would read it aloud and then think aloud so that the students could hear and see her thought process. Does this make sense? How do I know it doesn't make sense? What can I change? And then the teacher would fix the order of the words to create a sentence where the syntax is correct. Then the students and the teacher would do one together. They would echo read it aloud and then ask the students if it makes sense, why or why not, and then they would work together in fixing the sentence to put it in the correct syntax. They would complete 3 problems together to allow them some practice with the teacher's guidance. These sentences, a side note, these sentences would have visuals so that the students, if they didn't know the meanings of the words, they could have that visual support as well to help them. And then the students would do a you do. They would do 2 problems aloud, and then they would share their answers aloud with the class if they felt comfortable on whether or not the syntax was correct or not correct, and if it was not correct, how they changed the sentence to make it correct. And then as an assessment, the teacher could either use those 2 sentences that the students did aloud to guide whether or not she needs to collect another additional assessment, or if the students are getting it or not getting it clearly using the UDO model, the teacher could use that as her assessment piece and then build off of what the students are starting to learn. If the teacher needed to do another assessment, she could have the students complete a fill-in worksheet that has a word bank, and it would be some sentences, maybe 3-5 sentences, and they would look like this sample right here where it says Mary went to the blank, or blank ate a banana, and students would have to use words in the word bank to fill in the blank in order to create a sentence that follows the correct syntax, and they would have to use semantic clues and what they know based on what they've learned on syntax in order to choose a word that would complete the sentence and make practical sense.